Listening to the Critical Hour on Radio Sputnik. I'm Wilmer Leon, joined here by my co-host Garland Nixon.
Thank you, Wilmer.
Antiwar.com has a piece entitled "An American Appeals to Taiwan. Don't Vote to Be Ukraine 2.0. American bullets, Taiwanese blood is an evil bargain." On January 13th, the people of Taiwan officially designated the Republic of China will elect a new president and unicameral legislature known as the Legislative Yuan. The election hinges on the question of Taiwan's policy toward the mainland, the People's Republic of China. That policy will have a profound impact on East Asia and the world. What does this mean going forward? For insight, let's turn to our next guest. He holds the John J. and Rebecca Moores Chair of History and African American Studies at the University of Houston, one of the most prolific writers of our time. His latest books are entitled "I Dare Say," a Gerald Horne reader, and "Acknowledging Radical Histories." Dr. Gerald Horne, as always, welcome back.
Thank you for inviting me.
So when you look at the data, when you look at the polling, how do the people of Taiwan feel about secession versus the status quo? In 2023 polling by Taiwan's National Chengchi University's election study, 88.1% favor the status quo for now. 60.7%, which are the two top categories, want to maintain the status quo with no specific goal for the future. Whereas in contrast, only 1.6% want unification as soon as possible, with only 4.5% want independence. So, Dr. Horne, there seems to be some parallels between the polling in Taiwan and the government's response to the desire of the people and what we're seeing play itself out here in the United States. And whether it's Gaza or whether it's Ukraine, the governments seem to be ignoring the interest and the will of those they claim to represent. Dr. Gerald Horne.
Well, I would direct you and your audience to the bipartisan so-called Congressional Committee on the House side of Capitol Hill that allegedly, apparently, has as its mandate scoring and scorning the Communist Party of China. They've been having hearings all over the country. Most recently, they had a hearing on Wall Street where they're trying to disrupt the relationship between U.S. capital and the People's Republic of China, which will not be an easy task, although certainly not impossible. We all know that Apple is heavily invested in China. Tesla would not be where it is today without production in China. Then there's Starbucks, which is en route, if it's not there already, of having more coffee shops in China than in the United States of America. Microsoft, KFC, the list is long. And yet we see that the mandarins at the State Department are calling for, if not demanding, a decoupling. The new term actually is de-risking. That is to say, building what they call a small garden with a high wall. That is their description of what relations between China and the United States should be like nowadays. The problem is that their so-called allies are not necessarily on board. Speaking of the Federal Republic of Germany and France in the first instance, and we also should say that it's not clear, as your remarks suggested, if Taiwan is on board. This is the island off the southern coast of China, which China claims as its own, a population of only about 20 million compared to 1.3, 1.4 billion on the mainland. It was colonized by Japan beginning in the 1890s. And when the Communist Party came to power, October 1st, 1949, that pre-existing relationship with Tokyo held forth, and therefore the defeated nationalists of the so-called KMT moved en masse to Taiwan, although interestingly enough, the nationalists of KMT are now more prone to work out some sort of agenda with the People's Republic of China than their opponents are, who currently hold power. The problem we see obviously stems directly from the deal made by Henry Kissinger and Richard Nixon about 50 odd years ago, when, in an attempt to encircle the Communist Party of the then Soviet Union, they worked out a deal with the Communist Party of China, which led to massive foreign direct investment into China, which has now created this juggernaut that is now the number 2 economy on planet Earth. And I'm sure that you realize that if their wildest and most demonic dreams are realized, that is to say, the overthrow of the Communist Party of China, probably having something to do with that will be the U.S. current relationship with India. Because obviously the United States is trying to build up India as sort of a counterpart to China. Apple already is moving some of its facilities from the Chinese mainland into India. Then, of course, if India becomes the number 2 economy, then they'll have to figure out a way to overthrow the ruling party in New Delhi. And so the beat goes on. Obviously, this is a way to pump up the bottom line of the military-industrial complex, which, by the way, has been doing quite well in light of this adventure in Ukraine and in light of this current adventure in historic Palestine. Their stocks are going through the roof. And we see that now there's an attempt to construct a so-called Asian NATO. That is to say, it's not enough to have a North Atlantic Treaty Organization that's focusing on Russia. Now they want a counterpoint, a counterpart in Asia, which presumably would include the Republic of Korea, speaking of South Korea, which has China as one of its major trading partners. I'm not sure how that's going to work out. Obviously, the Philippine Islands, formerly colonized by the United States, is sadly enough on board, but I'm not sure if they have the wherewithal and the muscle to go toe-to-toe with the People's Republic of China. And in any case, as you skim and scan the environment, you see that other nations are not on board, particularly Singapore, which has a Chinese majority population, a population of ethnic Chinese in the majority, and has profited handsomely from its bilateral relations with the People's Republic of China. It's not clear if Indonesia is on board as well. And certainly you could rule out Russia. That is a given. And so we see that the United States is setting itself up for a bruising. We see that this decoupling and de-risking strategy is going to have a damaging impact on U.S. agriculture, particularly the soybean farmers of Iowa in particular. And we also see that it will have a damaging impact on higher education, because as of now, China sends across the Pacific a goodly number of undergraduate and graduate students. A number of scientific laboratories are basically dependent upon these Chinese students. Already you see that these Chinese students are now moving to matriculate in Australia, in Great Britain, and France. And then it's also fair to say is that it's going to have a devastating impact upon Asian Americans. The New York Times had an article about this the other day, talking about how Asian Americans, and particularly Chinese Americans, are considered to be suspect because of their ethnic ancestry, even though they oftentimes have the foreign language skill that could allow them to be key U.S. operatives. I noticed that in the New York Times this morning that there was reference to the point that the United States would like to infiltrate agents into the inner circle of President Xi Jinping. I'm not sure how that can be done unless there's someone of Chinese ancestry, to be frank. And in any case, China is not lying recumbent as the United States is scheming. They have very close relationships with Cuba, 90 miles from South Florida, not to mention Bahamas, Jamaica, Venezuela, Nicaragua, and of course, its fellow BRICS member, speaking of Brazil. So the United States is obviously overstretched. It cannot fruitfully direct this Taiwanese election in a manner that it would choose to. But in any case, I think it's fair to say that they're saying, damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead.
Also, the Sputnik reports NATO weakness exposed as the U.S.-led Red Sea coalition flops. We've got about 2.5 minutes.
Flop indeed. France and Italy are not on board. We also see that what we have to keep in mind is that Israel might be trying to create some sort of crisis whereby the United States will intervene to help to rescue Israel's chestnuts from the fire. That's the import of their repeated attacks on Lebanon. But of course, the Hezbollah has struck back, hitting the major Israeli base at Mount Meron, which in some ways is one of the most significant bases on Israeli territory. We also see that the Iraqi resistance has hit Haifa, that major Israeli city. And if you look at your map, that's quite a distance. And so we have to conclude, I'm afraid to say, that the United States might be inveigled or, in fact, enthusiastically enter this war because they would like to see the liquidation of Hezbollah, the overthrow of the Islamic Republic. You saw that when Mr. Biden spoke in South Carolina yesterday, he was interrupted by protesters signaling that mass opposition to these bellicose policies has not gone away, and in fact will probably accelerate in coming days, weeks, and months.
Dr. Gerald Horne, thank you very much. As always, we appreciate that analysis, and we look forward to having you back.
Thank you.